Listen, grit and tenacity will get you somewhere, but it'll only get you there.
We over-index on grit and operating efficiently, by and large, and we spend less time on operating intelligently and strategically.
Welcome to Confessions of a Vistage Chair. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We have real, behind-the-scenes conversations with Vistage Chairs who share honest stories and practical insights on leadership growth, peer advisory groups, and what actually happens in Vistage meetings. Let's pull back the curtain. You're not new to kind of our ecosystem. Like you went on, I think you went on Alana's podcast.
I went on Alana's podcast probably 6 months ago about the which is primarily the sales podcast, correct?
Yep. It's all about sales, and I'm sure you had an amazing conversation about sales. What's interesting about this is kind of like a deep dive into your background. And there's already things that like I picked up that I think are going to be really interesting to explore. And if you're okay with it, like almost like the theme of this is like strategy. And it seems like something that's kind of near and dear to you. You've been in positions where there is a bunch of strategy that's involved, but like, I think that's a really kind of topical with AI and like everything that's happening right now. It's almost like there's strategy overload. And so what things do we pick as an organization? And so, well, let's start with this. Your credentials are incredible. So you went to Harvard. Like, how did that, growing up, were you like, this is where I want to go? Or how did that come to be?
No, it was a real surprise to me and my family. I grew up in Fresno. My parents, had not gone to college. My dad was a successful salesperson, but I was channeled into a gifted program in elementary school and did well. And then I did well on the PSAT, in the distant past, and Harvard Summer School sent me a postcard saying, we have a summer program for rising gifted, that's what they call this, gifted seniors. Would you like to come to Harvard for summer school? I was kind of shocked and had a family friend who'd gone to Stanford, and I asked, and he said, well, I think you should do it. So I went and loved it, had a great experience. It was really transformative. And then I went back to high school, and when I applied for the real thing, Harvard let me in. But it was very surprising and serendipitous.
Interesting. And when you're like, for the kids that are out there, for people that are looking, like, do you look back at that time and you're like, Ivy League is impactful and it's something that you should certainly kind of set your sights on and your goals for? Or are you like, well, Andy, you learn the same thing, but it is what it is?
I think Ivy League is great, has a bunch of cultural and other baggage and challenges, to be honest. So I think Malcolm Gladwell has written a lot about this, and I think it's important to me. It's really helpful if you have the opportunity to go to a school where there's a lot of bright, ambitious people who you'll be surrounded with. We're all trying to do, interesting things with their lives. And I don't know, and if you're at Harvard or Stanford, that's a slightly different concentration than you get at Michigan or Yale or UCLA. But I think there are a lot of places that you can get a great education. And so, I had one of my daughters went to Yale. She had a fabulous experience, but she was going to have a great experience if she'd gone to a different school. So I encourage people to not get too hung up on the credentials. But I mean, it's nice. People assume you're smart if you have a Harvard or Princeton degree or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and you knew that early on, because you were in the gifted program. It reminds me of the God, what was that comic? It was like The Upside Down or The Other Side. Maybe it's called The Other Side. But there was that one where he was pushing the door, and it was like something the gifted school, and it was like pool. And
I think it was the Far Side.
The Far Side, yeah. That's like the only Far Side one that I remember was the gentleman pushing the door. And so what did you do after that? Like, were you strategic in like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this, or did you just kind of where'd you go after Harvard?
So after Harvard, I took a bike and rode around Europe for 4 months because I'd never been able to afford to go to Europe. So I sold my truck. I was from Fresno, and I'd had a pickup truck that I'd used for some summer jobs. And then I went to DC. I was really interested in politics. I worked on Capitol Hill for a couple of years. Then I came back to California. I did a public affairs and leadership fellowship in Southern California called Coro. And then I decided that I was really more interested in business than a legal or political career. And so I stayed in LA and went to UCLA and got my MBA.
When you were doing the stuff on Capitol Hill, like, are there things that you looked back on when you were getting into business and strategy and you were like, hey, there's some good stuff that happened, or there's some kind of nuggets or lessons learned from that experience?
Yeah, in terms of the time on the, in Washington, I still remember some of the characters. I was, worked for a very dynamic congressman named Tony Coelho, who was from the Central Valley. He was a phenomenal fundraiser. I also remember those were the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who disagreed about politics, but they were able to disagree agreeably, and they'd fight about politics, and then and policy, but then they would meet for a drink, and it was a much less polarized time then, and so strategically, I think that's a smarter way to get to better outcomes than what we have now. Yeah, so I'll stop with that. And in terms of strategy, I mean, it's for me, I would say I learned a lot about politics, enough to say it's like, I think there are better places for me to go devote my energies than to be full-time in politics. Not because it's not a worthy career, just because it didn't align with what I thought I was good at and what I was more passionate about.
I love that. And a lot of your business career has kind of taken you down the strategy path, and obviously the things that you do today are very much entrenched in strategy. Not to skip right to it, but like I am deeply curious. Like, you spent some time at Redbox, and I feel like there's probably an amazing case study that could be done, because I think everybody remembers Redbox. They were in every McDonald's parking lot. Like, it was like when you wanted an alternative to like walking into Blockbuster and getting hit with penalties, like you would go to Redbox. And like Redbox and Netflix were really kind of the innovative Blockbuster arm.
Mm-hmm.
And you spent some time there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that Redbox team. The Redbox had been incubated as a business at McDonald's, because McDonald's was trying to get people to come into McDonald's restaurants at nighttime, and so they spent a bunch of time trying to figure out the right model, and eventually they got it. And ironically, when Redbox was really ready to spin out of McDonald's, it was 2008, in the depths of the kind of big financial crash then, and so Redbox merged with Coinstar, which had a very established but slow growing kiosk business, and so that was but people were still trading in coins during the recession, so Coinstar had money, and they were able to buy the business. So that was just kind of an interesting thing on the importance of timing and luck and exterior conditions, because Redbox had done a ton of stuff right, but when they came out, the timing was really challenging, and that it ultimately affected the strategy and outcome for the business, I believe.
I had no idea until you just said it. Now it makes sense, because like most of the places, I mean, I saw them at 7-Elevens and some other places like that as well. But now you always saw them at McDonald's. So did McDonald's at the time have like a venture arm, or just like an internal innovation team?
Yeah, they had an internal innovation team. Very successful guy, Greg Kaplan, was running it, and Redbox was his baby, and he became president of Redbox, and then he stuck with it for several years after the business merged with Coinstar. And yeah, and then it was a very interesting thing because Redbox and Coinstar both had an awareness that they were building profitable businesses, but what I would describe that they were melting icebergs. Like ultimately, there was going to be a form factor change, and DVDs weren't going to be around forever. And so Redbox knew that, even as it was ramping up, that it was going to need to figure out, something, else to do. And I just find it fascinating the strategic choices that Redbox and Netflix made and the long-term consequences of their respective approaches. And I know a number of people at Netflix, and obviously I know the leadership of Redbox very well, and I have huge respect for the Redbox leaders.
Pulling on this thread a little bit of like strategy, because I think that this is something that many, maybe even a majority of leadership teams get wrong. An organization, generally speaking, like they don't fail for a lack of effort. Like people are moving, and especially in crisis, like people are generally moving even faster, especially if everybody's aligned around the vision and believes in what they're doing. Like everybody's trying. When you think about strategy, like what are some of the key or core components of like getting it right?
Oh, um, that's a great question, and it depends on the size of the organization. But thinking strategically is different than being an efficient operator, and they're kind of different skill sets. And I think and that's one of the reasons why at scale, at very large scale, you have your sort of McKinsey, Bain, BCGs are able to charge huge amounts of money for large enterprises because the value of what I describe strategy is making sure you're working on the right problem. Are you working on the A plus problem for your business at that time is incredibly important. And it's different than operating an efficient ship. And so I think that we over-index on grit and operating efficiently by and large, and we spend less time on operating intelligently and strategically. And it's very hard for efficient operations to be intelligent and strategic, and they often need help.
I love this conversation. Like this is so top of mind for me right now, and thinking through like where does strategy live. And I actually this weekend I literally had a whole conversation with Claude around this, just trying to think of like based upon your stage and your size and everything else, because we talk about this thing in business called like ownership. Like if too many people own it, then nobody owns it, or if nobody owns it, then nobody owns it. And so this whole notion of like strategy and who owns strategy. And so I was having a conversation with Claude literally this weekend about like who owns strategy. And he gave me this whole breakdown, and it was like 0 to 50 million, it's the founder. 50 to 100 million, if it's a hired CEO, it's like it's the CEO on like weekends. And then like once you really start getting up there, you can afford to bring in a McKinsey or another like consulting firm. But there's this space between like the founder and the CEO and like being able to afford those other things where it's just kind of limbo land. Like who owns strategy?
I mean, I've worked at big global companies, Fortune 500 companies, movie studios, and in those cases, it's the CEO, the board, and then a lot of times there will be someone who is a former strategic consultant leading a team. And so at the Disney level, J.P. Morgan Chase, pick your big company. There's the CEO and he or she will likely have a strategic team and advice by the board, and they'll hire outside folks. And so that's on the bigger scale. I think it's relatively straightforward, although it's going to be interesting with the capabilities of all the LLMs and AI, how well the strategic planning firms are going to be able to maintain those relationships. Where I play is in the the what I call you know middle market companies. So say 5 to 50 million, although I'll go up to 100 million. And in those cases, it's really the owner or the founder is most responsible for it. And those people, they're not necessarily strategic planners. I mean, they're often in sort of intuitive, scrappy operators who got an idea and they were very tenacious. But then they run into the issue of what got you here won't get you there. And they need to start to think strategically about what's the problem they're directing their company at. And I think, it's really smart for those people to get to try and find help.
Where have you observed, because you're a Vistage Chair, you do a lot of things and you interface with a lot of business leaders and a lot of companies. Where's generally that inflection point where, like, listen, grit and tenacity will get you somewhere, but it'll only get you there? And like, where have you seen generally that inflection point where it's like, hey, more effort or more humans or more servers like are not going to solve this problem?
I probably put a little lower. I'd say probably above about 25 million. There start to be significant complications around opportunity prioritization. Where are you going to point the ship, and who's going to get the resources? And that also starts to be big enough so you have executive teams fighting over resources, and that may or may not be strategic. And so at that point, honestly, I think it behooves CEOs and business owners, and this is a little self-serving too. They can join a Vistage group, they can join YPO, but I think to at least have that kind of sounding board of people who don't report to them and depend on their paycheck on the CEO. And then a lot of times it's I think it's like I'm doing work with an AI strategic planning platform that targets middle market companies, and because it's just such an incredibly valuable thing for those companies to stop, get off the execution treadmill, and think about what's the direction we should be going for the next 2 to 3 years. So and whether people hire a strategy consultant, whether they hire a firm like Go Grow, or they join a YPO or Vistage group, I think people should. The better CEOs have the humility to say, I don't know that I have all the answers now. Maybe I can ask some smart people, and they can help me formulate where to go here, because it gets confusing for CEOs.
And I love what you just like the whole self-serving nature. Vistage changed my life, and so like just to like add to what you just said there of like Vistage, YPO, EO, like it doesn't having a peer group or a group of professionals around you that are solving similar challenges is incredibly important. It doesn't have to be same industry, but the challenges are generally very similar as you're scaling a company. So 100%. Also the 25 million number, I love that, because it's almost like 0 to call it 10 million. It's like it's grit, it's tenacity, it's the founders, it's a few people, but it's not that they're non-skilled, but I would almost say like they're not specialized. Like you're not yet going like super deep into the expertise that you're getting. It's just like all hands on deck, very entrepreneurial. It's like that 10 to 25 million, you can afford to bring in some subject matter experts. You're really starting to fill in that leadership team. So I love what you just said right there, where it's like 25 million, great. Like you've been able to scale it to that point. You probably have a decent leadership team at that point. And now everybody's just like, well, where are we going? Or maybe it's more so like, how are we going to get there if you already have something along the lines of where we're going?
And I'm glad that you've found Vistage and that it's working well for you. I mean, I think a strong peer group you can just do huge benefit for a CEO who's willing to be vulnerable in that setting. And and it depends on the industry and the CEO. I think 25 million. There start for most companies. There start to be some layers of complexity, and it's and ooh wow, we a lot of them. There's like I never thought we'd get this big. Where what do we do now, Coach? And the good news is that I mean, strategic planning is a uh, an approach to thinking about business that people spend a lot of time on, and people spend a lot of time about thinking about accounting and marketing, and they've spent a lot of time thinking about strategy as well. And I think it's like many things, you can go to Claude or ChatGPT and say, "Hey, I need a PR campaign. I need marketing. I need whatever," and it can hack together a pretty darn capable response. But if you want to have something that is, I think, going to be more compelling for your business, it helps to have to work with a smart human who is also working with AI. I think a smart human working with AI creates a much better moat for most companies than for the $10 million CEO to say, okay, I'm going to go to Claude and I'm going to be my own marketing VP. I don't need any additional help. So that's my thing. I think the LLMs are and AI are really much more powerful when they are joined with some domain expertise, so people know how to engineer the prompts and run the process better.
I agree. And like there's a lot of kind of scare that's out there right now with AI, and like AI is taking over the world and it's taking everybody's jobs. And I've always looked, and maybe this will change. Like who knows where this goes a couple decades from now. Right now, how I feel about AI is it's like an exoskeleton that provides this superpower, but you still need the human in there to interface, because it's just an like if you were just like, hey, what's the strategy? And it just spit it out and you just followed it. Like there's landmine, there's so much that goes into execution of whatever the output of that AI is. So long-winded for like couldn't agree more with you there.
Yeah, it's because if you just get a beautiful 30-page strategic plan, but it hasn't brought the team along, and it hasn't kind of assigned very specific goals and tasks and timing for those, then it's probably just going to be a pretty strategic plan that goes on a shelf and people go shrug, and 9 months ago or 9 months go by and people won't have done anything. And so I think that's where having and it's tough for CEOs to do this on their own. I know a number of them who insist on doing their own strategic planning, and they're really smart people. But ultimately, I think they shortchange themselves and their companies by not getting an outside resource to hold them accountable and and be more specific about some of the details, because it's just like I said, very few CEOs are strategic planners by nature. I mean, they tend to be different temperaments than strategists.
Do you believe, this whole notion of like what got us here won't get us there? Do you think that sometimes this applies to the human, meaning the CEO or the founder as well? Because you talked a lot about, you know, a lot of great founders are incredible at maybe executing or getting stuff done, things like that, but maybe not so much on the strategic thinking. Do you think this is something where like, well, to truly get to 100, 300, 500 million, like you need a strategic thinker? Or do you think that it's like, no, it always and will always go back to having the right people? So if you bring those people into the organization, whether contracted or full time, you can kind of cover down on some of those blind spots.
I think a lot of it depends on the CEO. I mean, there's some good evidence that if you have a phenomenal founder, if you have a Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon, Larry, and Sergey, at Google, that they can go a long ways, and if they're intelligent, so like at Google they hired Eric Schmidt, uh, and and there are various kind of uh, paths. Uh, it is the rarer CEO who can be and obviously the shining example, lately is Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, who's a super tenacious technical founder. But um, I was listening to you know, it's kind of like the NVIDIA authorized biography called The NVIDIA Way. And they started as a graphics chip company and almost went bankrupt multiple times, but, with bad product choices that they would admit. But somehow they ended up being sort of the last company standing out of 60 graphics chip companies, and they've done some incredibly strategic things. So I think it depends. For mostly the Even if it's a charismatic founder, they can't do it by themselves, and they need to create a great team that can execute, and usually that will involve some strategic thinkers, and so that's the case. Now that doesn't mean the founder has to get sidelined. I mean, sometimes founders, are better off if they go into leading a more technical organization. But I think it really depends on the company, the founder, and the industry. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. And there certainly are founders like the ones I mentioned who grow and emerge as strategic thinkers, and they can create incredibly successful organizations.
All right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium sized businesses, because the organizations that can hire and retain world class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TALENTHARBOR.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired. Some of this is maybe all of it. Like the strategy is working on the right problem. And there was a couple things that I thought of there, and I'm not. This wasn't the right way to do business. It was just a matter of like the situation that we were in. So my last company, like we were always cash strapped. Like from the outside looking in, everybody's like, "Oh, look at their growth and look at this and look." Well, in consumer product, you need inventory, and so you're basically always just chasing down the dollar, whether it's from your vendors or trying to extend payment terms. And it was like those challenges always forced us to not necessarily focus on the wrong things because they were the right things, but they were always the most emergent things, not necessarily the most strategic things.
Mm.
And it always took me back to The Martian is one of my favorite movies. And at the end, what Matt Damon's talking about, they were like, what is it to be an astronaut? How do you get back to Earth? And he's like, well, you solve one problem, then you solve another problem. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And that stuck with me like forever. Um, but it's about solving the right problem and solving them in the right order. And there's a whole Apollo 13. I won't nerd out on all these astronaut movies,
Mm.
but like, how can a leadership team or a CEO, like, how do they know, or what are some methods or strategies to make sure that they are focused on solving the right problems?
Oh, that's Boy, that is a really great and nuanced questions because you certainly have to have grit and confidence, and sometimes, often, a CEO of a growing company needs to have um, project, you know, more um, more confidence than the results would justify, right? In order to pull people along and create, because there is a when the kind of the Steve Jobs model, creating a reality distortion field that gets people to believe something extraordinary can happen. But the that can also, in the wrong hands, lead to really bad things. It can lead to people just lying, right? And there's been, uh, there are multiple examples of people who ended up committing fraud when they thought they were just going to fake it until they made it, but in fact they committed fraud. And so there needs to be, and it's hard to tell because some of these people who were fraudulent were on paper, billionaires who are on the covers of all kinds of magazines. So it's really, hard to tell. The other, so I would say staying tethered to some core of honesty. And the other tether I think is really essential is um, humble confidence. Because if you don't have humility, confidence can, edge into hubris. And then that hubris so often leads companies to bad things. Any number of entrepreneurs I know who created something that was really successful, and then based on that success had too inflated a view of their own insight, and they took companies public and then they took them into bankruptcy. And there's kind of a Goldilocks zone. There's, I'm confident, but I'm humble enough to say, ooh, I know that I would like some help. As things emerge, what are the right problems to pursue? And uh, and it's not always, obvious or intuitive. And so that's my, uh, I guess my biggest things to guard on are people who can deceive themselves, and then people who become uh, too arrogant in their success, because that very very often leads to bad outcomes. But if you have people who are at their core honest and uh, confident but still humble, then the opportunities to grow and have sustained growth, I think, are um, can last a long time.
Hmm. That's such an interesting kind of pathway. It's like when you were bringing up some of those examples, there are, without naming names, like there's publicly traded companies today that make a lot of promises that may or may not happen, and the only reason they may happen is because they continue to say it and continue to drive a team to accomplish that. And sometimes it's like saying it and promoting it like helps get us there, and then like you just said, like there's other people that were saying it and promoting it, they couldn't get there, and then it was like, well, that was fraud because you never get there. And it's like it's such this weird fine line. And obviously you're in the valley, so there's a lot of fundraising and there's a lot of talk that has to happen to get the funds.
Yeah, and I have to say, one of the things I always, in terms of um, President Reagan, that while he was able to reach across the aisle and work with the leading Democrats at the time, and he had a very clear approach. He said, well, at the end of the day, facts are stubborn things, and um, and I think that's true. In the long run, facts are super important, and um, and that's where it's helpful for even the most charismatic founder to have thought partners. If you have a charismatic founder, then you can have a technical co-founder. You can have, an advisory board. You have people who can challenge their thinking, because everybody you know, iron sharpened, when I think it's the, man, like iron sharpens stone, or stone like stone sharpens iron, and you need that friction of testing, debating, proposing, seeing the evidence that the world brings back, and then iterating as you know more. And the other thing I'll say is it's really helpful to do that in a constraint in a resource constrained environment when you have too many resources. And this was one of the companies that I was at that raised many millions of dollars from premier venture capital organizations, and it was too much money too soon. And even though it was an outstanding team, it was too rich. And if that team had raised 80% less, I bet it would have created a really successful company instead of some beautiful software that no one really used.
When that happens, is it because they're investing in the wrong areas at that point? Is it a false sense? Like, I hear you on that, and
Yeah.
you see it all the time. And it's funny because I go back, we raised $12 million at Hunt Killer. And one of the things I thought about in retrospect, I was like, did we invest all that in the right areas? Like, if we wouldn't have had that, like, would we have been better off? What's your take on that?
Yeah, you would have been better off if you hadn't
Is that,
at raising that much.
not on that one. Like, what, what's you're right. Um, what's that's for beers. Um, like when you see these great companies start going in the wrong directions because they've got too much resources, when you're like, oh well, the normal thinking there is like more money means more growth or more this or more that, and what you've seen is the opposite. Like, why do you think that happens?
There's a lot of really good thinking about it, and I'm reading a book, right now, and it's sorry, and it's Inside the Box by David Epstein, who also wrote Range, and it's kind of the power of constraints to encourage efficient thinking. And one of the stories in the book is about this company, General Magic, which was incredibly well resourced with fantastic people, particularly out of Apple, and they went public on essentially no revenue, and they had a vision for something that kind of ended up being the iPhone, but it was they had so much money and and virtually no constraints that they weren't able to focus efficiently on the right tasks in the right order. And so my argument is that for a long time being capital efficient is actually really important. And then with certain kinds of tech companies, there is okay, we need to pour gasoline on the fire and go grab land as fast as we can. And so there is that growth story. But I think by and large, you want small teams that have to solve problems creatively and efficiently are a much better choice than large, very well resourced teams. And there have been lots of studies that the natural human inclination in solving hard problems is they add more resources to it, they add more people, and they add more money, and it almost always just slows things down.
I can see that. I had a follow up on that one. I didn't want to take us backwards. I will take us backwards just a little bit. So when you talk about the problems,
Mm-hmm.
there's this notion, and you talked about the sequencing of the problems, and one of your arguments is, once you've got enough capital, like, the whole idea might be, well, we can solve all these problems at the same time. And I think what you're saying is like, there's still a sequence, and there's still a focus, and there's still a, like, doing this one, then doing the next one. And I will nerd out just a little bit with Apollo 13, which is like, there was something going on. They were getting in an argument, and he was like, that's problem 1632. We're on problem 4. He was like, yes, that's a problem, but it's not a problem right now. When you think through, and like when you're coaching leaders and all of these things that you do, and the strategic planning, like, how do you help business leaders sequence or prioritize the right things?
Oh, um, well, it's a really, nuanced thing based on a combination of pattern recognition, um, and rigorous thinking, and also some intuition about what that team is capable of. But ultimately, um, these are humans who are going to have to go execute against a plan, and what you try to help them do is see as far forward as they can, given what they now know, and give them enough resources to execute to that next place. And then when you get farther along, well, you'll be able to see further into the future, and then maybe you can, give them some additional capital, and they can move a little faster. But it needs to be go in a disciplined and order. And in the Epstein book I was referring to, they absolutely talk about how the moonshot, which we say, think of as like, oh, it's this incredible, crazy thing, was in fact thousands of small problems that we're going to get. How are we going to feed these? How are we going to feed these people? How are we going to get them into orbit? How are we going to know, the telemetry for the thing? Oh, once they get to the moon, how do we get them off of the moon? And we're very, and they were. It was sort of the success of putting, a man or sort of men on the moon was in, I think, the opposite of the common perception about a moonshot. Even after Kennedy said we're going to put a man, on the moon by the end of the decade in his inauguration speech, they that was the product of sort of similar to The Martian, um, the Andy Weir book, thinking through thousands and thousands of problems that needed to be solved with a rigorous mindset in a specific order.
This is not a trick question. It's asked all the time. I feel like your perspective on it will be incredibly unique. The whole adage of what's more important, strategy or execution. When you think about both of those things, like how do you think about the level of importance on both of them?
Well, I think so. I'm going to take a third path, which is I'm going to say, well, like it's famous that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Mhm.
Having said that, I think building a winning culture is a strategic decision, and that great companies design winning cultures, and they rarely happen by accident. So that's, gosh, who's the guy who wrote Culture by Design? He was a speaker at my Vistage group. David Friedman wrote a book called Culture by Design, and 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 I guess here's what I would say: if you have great strategy but bad culture and bad execution, you're going to be dead anyway. If you have great execution but terrible culture and a crummy strategy, it's not going to matter. You can have a great culture and you're working on a terrible problem. Who cares? So there is a virtuous cycle among strategy, culture, and execution that all feed on each other. And the part I would say is that culture and execution are important at all times.
Hmm.
Getting the right strategy is important, but it's more episodic. Like there's points where you set the strategy and okay, this is our strategic direction, and it's gonna hold you for ideally a few years. It may hold you for 2, 3, 4 years. I mean, with all the technology innovation, people aren't really planning out much past 3 years these days because the technological changes are different. But that's what I would say is if you were going to have the pillar, it's culture, strategy, and execution, and strategy kind of is going to determine whether having a great culture and a great execution are going to matter.
Mhm.
Uh, but if you just have a great strategy, that's not going to do it. So that's, to me, the holy trinity.
Yep.
And a great culture will help you execute. But if you haven't strategically chosen the direction for your company, doesn't matter how good you are at the other stuff. Um, it's not really going to matter.
It feels like AI and innovation and technology is like it's getting this it's forcing a sense of urgency into people. When you are consulting companies, like when you're talking to business leaders and they're like, we just need to go because we need to get ahead of this, and if we're not ahead of this, then we're going to be left behind. And one of the reasons this question popped is because you talked about, technology companies in over 10 years, and the overnight success is not overnight. There's like a lot of things that are happening over a long period of time to get to that point. Are we still at a time period where, like, you know not taking our time but being disciplined and being focused is acceptable, or is there going to be just a graveyard of companies that are left behind because of how fast technology is accelerating?
Well, there's certainly going to be a graveyard of companies left behind. Now, is that going to be because they didn't stamp their foot on the accelerator in a panic because AI was coming so fast? I'd actually say I think it's it's the reverse. The people who the CEOs who panic and just step on the gas without thinking, of where they're going to go, they're more likely to follow Thelma and Louise off a cliff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, I mean it's, and I would argue that because the capabilities of AI are really significant in what it can unlock, that it's important to be thoughtful about how you want to employ. I mean, it's going to turn out to be a very powerful lever. Um, at the end of the day, I'm less concerned about uh, um, AGI and more considered about what are the applied AI things. And there's actually, I think Hard Fork was talking about um, in I think it was Hard Fork about in China. There's very much a focus on applied AI and less of and less about the U.S. and sort of what do those different models represent. But you always have to think strategically and carefully about what you're doing, and that was true of the steam engine and electricity and the railroads and the automobile and uh, you know, and certainly the internet and smartphones and now AI. It all These are big moves, but they are also um, there's a human pattern of adoption and assimilation and use of these new creative patterns that I think still holds true. And I would say that I think AI is incredibly powerful. It's going to create, um, and I mean, I'm sort of the Ezra Klein. I think it's going to create more abundance, for us because we're going to be able to solve harder problems better and faster. And there's going to be some dislocation on the way. Um, but I don't think the power of AI requires us to stop thinking and just move. I think we still need to take time and consider the problems we're solving carefully and then go try to execute on them with great cultures.
Hmm. Great cultures. It's so interesting how, because we've been talking about strategy this whole time, and now great culture has like continued to enter the conversation. Um, like, what does a great culture look like? Like when you walk into an organization and you're like, wow, this one has a great culture. Like, what are some of the attributes, or what are some of the things that you're seeing from the people or the teams or the leadership where you're like, I just know that this is a great culture?
So I'll just use um, an easy example. And a great culture looks like the Ritz Carlton feels.
Hmm.
Because you can go into a Ritz Carlton on 5 continents, and they've got 40,000 employees. And this will sound like a bit of a Ritz-Carlton commercial, but there's other hotels that are also fabulous. And Ritz-Carlton has, I think it's 20 fundamentals of how they do things, and they're very specific actions on what they do. So they're not ephemeral things on, we value integrity, or they're all specific things about how they act. And at the start of every work shift, at every Ritz Carlton in the world, they have a fundamental of the day. And whether it's the landscapers or the kitchen staff or the executives, they all get together and they talk about the fundamental of the day and how it applies to what they're doing in their job. And then they go do their jobs. And it only takes a couple minutes, and it consistently reminds everyone about how to uphold that standard. So that is what a winning culture feels like, is that because all those people at the Ritz-Carlton don't just behave that way because they had that orientation, when on the first day on the job. It was because they came into a place that prides itself on having a very specific way of, this is who we are and this is how we do things, and it makes it explicit, and it's an incredibly powerful thing, and that's what great culture in action looks like. I'd argue another great culture in action looks like the experience at a Trader Joe's.
What's that look like?
You have a terrible little parking lot, so you're frustrated when you go in.
I love this.
But then you go in, and it's and you have 80% of their own products in a small format. You have people in their kind of island costumes. They have many more staff than a typical Kroger or Safeway or Albertsons would have per square foot, and they have kind of interesting products. There's a sense of discovery. You can also get high quality stuff at a reasonable price, and they've, I think, really sort of done a nice job of balancing that. Oh, here's new stuff, and it's worth trying. But you can also get your butter and cheese and milk and eggs and chicken and whatever. And their sales per square foot are sort of triple what the industry average is. And here's one last thing about Trader Joe's. So they were started by a guy named Joe Cologne, Trader Joe, in South Pasadena. It wasn't an island thing, and he built it up from there. And then they got purchased by Aldi, massive German company that's very efficient, and Aldi kind of let them alone, and they have, they've expanded incredibly successfully. And I've got daughters in Brooklyn and DC and Boston, and when we go to the Trader Joe's in their neighborhood, it always kind of feels like the Trader Joe's I took them to when they were growing up in Menlo Park. So that's what Trader Joe's feels like.
I love it. Small parking spaces, incredibly frustrating, and then the experience of a lifetime.
And then you have a good experience. And I live close enough to, I moved a few years ago, I live close enough to my Trader Joe's in Palo Alto that I ride my bike. And I look at the parking lot and I go, ha, ha,
ha. It just reminds me of Costco, because like I've got the complete opposite experience with Costco, and it's the first thing that I think about. Of like when I go to a Costco parking lot, it's like you could pull a double wide in there and it'll fit, and you can almost get a cart between the cars. But you're right.
And that's another fabulous differentiated retailer, right? It's like their ridiculous $1.50 hot dog. That they've had for 11 years, 14 years. And they're $4.99 chicken, and a very different experience from Trader Joe's, but it's a distinct promise, and it's funny in these times. There's long lines at the Redwood City Costco for gas,
Hmm.
because but one thing you will never see at a Costco gas station. You'll never see the price.
Oh, interesting.
Every other gas station has to have the price because people are going by. Costco's brand promise on competitive pricing is so strong that they don't have to show the price.
I've never so all we do is get our gas at Costco. That's it. Like if I get in the car, it's like and the gas is low, it's like nope, don't go fill it up because on Friday we'll be at Costco and we'll fill it up then. I've never over the last 10 years that we've been getting gas at Costco, I've never once realized that there's no pricing. That's crazy.
And they don't need to. And I'll do the same if I'm getting down to a quarter of a tank and I'm like, oh, I'm getting a little nervous. I will go to my little expensive Shell in Menlo Park and put in $10.
Which by the way is a gallon and a half now
Yeah,
in
which is
California.
only a gallon and a half. So that I have some peace of mind. But it was funny. I was last week. I was in Carmel this weekend, and I had to fill up, and I spent $90 to fill up my Subaru, and I was like, I think that's the biggest number ever. But instead of being pissed at Costco, I was like, well, it would have been at least 100 if I'd gone anyplace else.
Yep.
Right. And so that's another company with a phenomenal culture, and very clear premium strategy, and and people vote with their money and their time.
I love it. Walter, we have covered so much. I knew that this was going to be a great conversation. We have covered so much ground. Um, I we haven't gotten to the self promotion yet, and I want to leave just a little bit for the self promotion. So, Walter, you do a lot of things, and so tell the audience what it is that you or all the things that you do, and then we'll get into the closing question.
Okay, so I'm a CEO and executive coach based in Palo Alto, and I typically work with companies CEOs that have 5 to 50 million in revenue, and I help them with um, leadership, team building, culture, and then I have some additional strategic work I do on strategy with a platform called Go Grow, and B2B sales with a platform called Outgrow. So I kind of have a growth orientation. Um, and I decided to work with those platforms because strategy and revenue growth to me are two problems that almost every CEO I work with, um, you know, has those challenges, and I want to be able to help them as much as I can.
Love it. Okay, someone just listened to this whole conversation. They're like, brilliant. I need some Walter. I either need him for strategy, sales growth, or some coaching.
You
What
know,
is the best, easiest way for them to get a hold of you?
oh, the easiest way is they can find me on LinkedIn and just message me there, or they can email me. I think probably just my Gmail is the easiest. I've got a Vistage email, and I've got some others, but just walter.paulsen@gmail.com is the I will always get those, and my AI assistant will get those, and they're easy to screen and follow up. And so yeah, and um, I've had some terrific success, in my career in Silicon Valley, and now the real excitement I get is helping other people, achieve their dreams. And if the way I talk and think, could help somebody, then I'd love to hear from them and see. I'd be glad to talk and see if I can help.
Awesome. I love it. And we didn't even scratch the surface on some of those other things. So we're gonna have to do a take two of this eventually and like dive deeper. And we just got so lost in the strategy, which I think is like to me when I talk to business leaders, like this is what's top of mind right now. Like, oh, the AI, I'm behind. Like, what do I focus on? Where do I focus? How do I know what to focus on? And so I just felt like strategy was the right call today, and you were so insightful. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation and your intelligent and probing questions.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Ryan.